The book that I chose for my book study is called Choice Words: How Our Language Affects Children's Learning by Peter H. Johnston. In productive classrooms, teachers don't just teach children skills, they build emotionally and relationally healthy learning communities. Teachers create intellectual environments that produce not only technically competent students, but also caring, secure, actively literate human beings. Choice Words shows how teachers accomplish this using their most powerful teaching tool, language. Throughout this book, Peter Johnston provides examples of apparently ordinary words, phrases, and uses of language that are pivotal in the orchestration of the classroom. Chapter 1: The Language of Influence in Teaching. Language is valuable and interesting, valuable enough to play with, powerful enough to change behavior without force. In 1978, Vygotsky taught us that children grow into the intellectual life around them. That intellectual life is fundamentally social, but also relational and emotional, and language has a special place in it. Children, in their own ways, teach us about the language of our classrooms. We as teachers play a critical role in arranging the discursive histories from which our students speak. Talk is the central tool of our trade. Talk mediates children's activities and experience and helps them make sense of learning, literacy, life, and themselves. In the classroom, you as the teacher has to make something of what children say and do. We make sense for ourselves and we offer a meaning for our students. We input intentions and we offer possible worlds, positions, and identities. Language has content, but it also bears information about the speaker and how he or she views the listener and their assumed relationship. This is called the ideational and the interpersonal dimensions. The most common focus of attention in recent years has been on the explicitness of the language we as teachers use. The most recent research has shown the most accomplished teachers do not spend a lot of time in telling mode. We as teachers decide what to be explicit about for which students and when to be explicit about it. Something to think about. How much time do you spend each day in telling mode? Chapter 2: Noticing and Naming. Noticing and naming is a central part of being a communicating human being, but it is also crucial to becoming capable doing particular activities. Teachers socialize children's attention to the significant features of literacy and learning in different domains. Noticing and naming are a central part of apprenticeship. We also learn things without naming them or even really being aware of them. It is our responsibility to help our students notice things and help mediate what is worth noticing and why. Some examples of teacher talk that have effects on individual students and classroom communities are: did anyone notice? I see you know how to spell the beginning of that word. Remember the first week when we had to really work on walking quietly? Now you guys do it automatically. What kind of text is this? You know what I heard you doing just now, Allie? Putting yourself in her place. You may not have realized it. You said, I want you to tell me how it went. What went well? What kinds of questions were raised? Write down a line you wish you had written. What are you noticing? Any other patterns or things that surprise you? Something to think about. Noticing and naming have important implications for critical literacy. How much noticing and naming do you do in your classroom? Chapter 3: Identity. Children in our classrooms are becoming literate. They are simply not learning the skills of literacy. They are developing personal and social identities, uniquenesses, and affiliations that define the people they see themselves becoming. Building an identity means coming to see in ourselves the characteristics of particular categories and roles of people, and developing a sense of what it feels like to be that sort of person and belong in certain social spaces. Our comments as teachers can offer our students opportunities to take up positions with respect to what they are studying, with respect to others in their social environment, and with respect to domains of practice. Our comments can nudge our students toward productive identities. Some of our responses are: what a talented young poet you are. That's not like you. Rather than reprimanding the student, the teacher suggests to the student that the problematic behavior just observed is atypical and that the overall pattern suggests a more admirable person. I wonder if, as a writer, you're ready for this. This at once asks the child to think about learning in terms of development or maturity and invites a desire to be viewed as having an expanded maturity. I bet you're proud of yourself. This is most productive after a how question that has established agency. Inviting a child to attend to internal feelings of pride builds upon the sense of agency and at the same time attaches an internal motivation to the activity. What are you doing as a writer today? The student is gently nudged, well, all right, pushed to rehearse a narrative with herself or himself as the writer protagonist, opening the possibility of the teacher elaborating the story with details and plot suggestions. What have you learned most recently as a reader? This is a question that causes the student to review recent learnings. The opening question requires an answer that begins, I learned. It insists on an agentive identity statement about reading and learning. Many of these identity learning conversational prompts essentially insist that children respond in ways that position them as active agents in their learning. Something to think about. Do your comments help nudge your students toward productive identities? Chapter 4, Agency and Becoming Strategic. Children should leave school with a sense that if they act and act strategically, they can accomplish their goals. According to the author, he calls this feeling a sense of agency. Some teachers are very good at building a sense of agency in children. The spark of agency is simply the perception that the environment is responsive to our actions, and many researchers argue that agency is a fundamental human desire. Having a sense of agency, then, is fundamental. Our well-being depends on it. Teachers' conversations with children help the children build the bridges between action and consequence that develop their sense of agency. They show children how, by acting strategically, they accomplish things, and at the same time, that they are the kind of person who accomplishes things. In order for children to develop a sense of agency, there are different kinds of stories children tell themselves. The following are examples of teacher comments, also known as agentive narratives, that are likely to influence the sense of agency children experience in the stories they tell about themselves as literate individuals. The teacher asks, how did you figure that out? This narrative invites a sense of agency as part of the child's literate identity. This strategy of arranging for a student to figure something out independently without full awareness and then reflecting on it has been called revealing. This strategy contrasts with revealing, where the teacher is explicit up front and then the student practices what he has been taught to do by someone else. What problems did you come across today? To set up agentive narratives, children have to face problems. For example, when a child encounters a problem, asking, what can you do, has several benefits. It reminds the student of his or her agency, I can do something, and asks for an explanation of possibilities without actually insisting that they be tried. How are you planning to go about this? Planning means organizing for a productive narrative. It is the most conscious part of being strategic because it happens before we get into the middle of things. Where are you going with this piece of writing? This question, like the previous one, is about planning and is forceful because there is no way to answer it simply without accepting the premise. Which part are you sure about and which part are you not sure about? This question could be addressed to a student who was aware he had spelled a word incorrectly, redirected his attention to the successful part of his efforts, and then focused his problem solving on the unsolved part, making the problem more focused and thus more trackable. You really have me interested in this character in your writing because of the things he says, and if you show me how he says them and what he looks like, I will get an even stronger sense of him. This statement draws the child's attention first and specifically to what has gone well. In particular, though, it shows what went well through its effect on the audience, showing the agency of authorship. However, pointing out to a student what worked well is not enough. Teaching requires moving beyond that to what is next for the student's development. That's like Kevin's story. He started off telling us his character is a lonely boy to get us caring about the main character. You, looking at Kevin, made a conscious choice. The key word in this fragment is choice. Choice is central to agency. Making a choice requires one to act, preferably to deliberate and act. Often we do things in particular ways or see things through particular perspectives, forgetting that there are options. Why? Why questions are the essence of inquiry. Once young children latch onto why questions, they come to see how useful they are for getting to the bottom of how some things work and finding the limits of others. Asking why children do or say the things they do helps them develop the consciousness and hence ownership of their choices. It brings to consciousness the feelings, intentions, relationships, motives, logic, values, and plans that lie beneath action and are the hidden levers of narrative. Why would an author do something like that? This question asks students to view writing as fundamentally intentional and rife with decisions. Naturalizing conversations about the intentional nature of writing provides the grounds for critical literacy. Developing in children a sense of agency is not an educational frill or some mushy-headed liberal idea. Children who doubt their competence set low goals and choose easy tasks, and they plan poorly. Children with strong belief in their own agency work harder, focus their attention better, are more interested in their studies, and are less likely to give up when they encounter difficulties than children with a weaker sense of agency. Something to think about. Do you as a teacher help build a sense of agency in your students? Chapter 5, Flexibility and Transfer or Generalizing. Children with transfer problems fail to generalize learning from one situation or problem to another. The less compartmentalized we make children's learning lives, the more likely they are to transfer their strategic problem solving to other situations. The following are examples of teacher talk that you can employ that serve to encourage transfer and flexibility. One of the things people do when they start a story is to think of what they know. Mathematicians do this too. Let's try it. How else? It is wonderful when a child solves a problem. We can then ask her to regale us with the story of how she solved it, building her sense of agency. That's like. The word like has two primary functions. It draws attention to connections with other experiences, books, authors, situations, practices words, and so forth. And it makes metaphors, both of which are fundamental not only to transfer, but also to understanding and reasoning. What if? Thinking flexibly and metaphorically involves expanding the imagination. And what if questions insist on an imaginative act? What if questions can be used to expand the context in which particular strategies might be used, or particular identities might hold sway? Playful language. Language play takes the pressure off language and literate practice and invites experimentation with alternative practices and realities. Playfulness can develop children's interest in language. The more we help children build a sense of themselves as inquirers and problem solvers, and the less they see boundaries between domains of inquiry, the more they are likely to transfer their learning into the world beyond school. Something to think about. Are you developing a sense of inquiry in your classroom and developing strong strategic problem solvers in your students? Chapter 6, Knowing. The common pattern of interaction between teachers and their students has been called the IRE for teacher initiates, student responds, and teacher evaluates, or sometimes referred to as IRF, for F being for feedback. In this interaction, the teacher is always in control because she takes the role of authority and knowledge giver, and the student is the knowledge receiver without authority. According to Parker Palmer, knowledge is composed of facts possessed by teachers who have the authority to transmit it to children, and children know about the world only through the knowledge that is transmitted to them. Gordon Wells calls this view of knowledge and communication transmissionary. Certain types of talk lead to conversations, the unspoken premise of which is that the students are experienced thinkers who have something to say that is worth listening to. According to Johnston, Giron, and Day, 2001, these conversational pivots are invitations to a more productive epistemology. Examples of talk are, let's see if I've got this right. The teacher then summarizes the student's extended comments. Any questions? Let's start with these. Teacher writes them on a chart. Silence. meaning waiting for the student to continue their comments. Thanks for straightening me out. That's a very interesting way of looking at it. I hadn't thought about it that way. I'll have to think about it some more. How did you know? How could we check? Would you agree with that? Is that an observation or conjecture? Never believe everything I say. Never believe everything any adult says. Something to think about. Does your classroom environment invite a more productive epistemology between you and your students? Chapter 7, An Evolutionary Democratic Learning Community. Children grow into the intellectual life around them, and that intellectual life is fundamentally social. The social relationships within which they learn are a part of their learning. Children, just like adults, learn better in a supportive environment in which they can risk trying out new strategies and concepts and stretching themselves intellectually. The comments in this chapter show how teachers use language to build caring and respectful learning communities. Communities that are playful, but in which participants take each other's ideas seriously in the process of getting things done. Teachers want communities that provide democratic and evolutionary intellectual environments. Examples of communities that provide democratic and evolutionary environments are we. The teacher includes the class as we, not as individuals. Who else would like that book? How do you think she feels about that? Any compliments? You guys say such important things. It amazes me you would talk while others are talking. And I wonder, you want your students to think beyond what has just been suggested. Are there any other ways to think about that? Any other opinions? What are you thinking? Stop and talk to your neighbor about it. You managed to figure that out with each other's help. How did you do that? I noticed, Emily, that when he was talking, it sort of jogged your mind. What were you thinking? You know, Josh, that just gave me a memory. Thank you. I'll just write it down. How do you know when a conversation is finished? This is how you go about making a large decision with a lot of parts. You take it in parts. Discussion is now open on how to decide which ones. Teachers must build productive learning communities with a language that reflects the dimensions we have explored. Something to think about. Do you use language that helps to build caring and respectful learning communities? Chapter 8, Who do you think you're talking to? Teaching, like parenting, is, for much of the day, automatic. In teaching, the proportion of conscious effort is a little higher, particularly in the planning department, but thinking through what we are going to say next as we interact with children would mean we were not giving them our full attention and not being genuine. Teachers making regular personal contacts with their students makes it easier for them to arrive at common understandings of learning situations, what is called intersubjectivity, making joint participation in intellectual problem solving possible. It is not simply the names and labels we invoke that affect children, or for that matter the love with which we embrace them, but teachers unwittingly use language to position them and provide them with the means to name and maim themselves. This book is dedicated to the possibility that we can wittingly use the same principles to do the reverse, provide children with the means and the desire to construct themselves as responsibly literate democratic citizens. Something to think about. Are you providing your students with the means and the desire to construct themselves as responsibly literate democratic citizens?